Since its inception, Justice at Stake has been privileged to work with some of the best judges and justices around the country, particularly from a number of state Supreme Courts. And we've also worked with just a whole raft of outstanding Chief Justices who are leaders in their own states and often become national leaders. And in fact, at Justice at Stake's launch event back in the year 2002, one of our principal speakers was the then Chief Justice of Texas, Tom Phillips. And it is my privilege today to welcome one of the best, Wallace Jefferson, who graciously agreed to come and join us today. And Justice Jefferson started his career as a successful appellate attorney. He won 2 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2001, he made history as the first African-American ever on the Texas Supreme Court. And a few years later, he became the first African-American Chief Justice on the Texas Supreme Court, where he then succeeded Tom Phillips, same gentleman I mentioned a minute ago. He spent a dozen years on the court. His record was very distinguished there, but he was one of those people, we all know them from all walks of life, who quite naturally gravitated into national leadership from his perch. And again, these are the types of justices and chief justices that we've worked with often. And he became president of a group called the Conference of Chief Justices, which is exactly what it implies. It's the chief justices from around the country. It's a very important and influential organization within the legal world. He became known as a reform leader. He was kind enough several years ago when we did an event releasing one of our reports to come be with us, with Justice O'Connor as well. And this is the kind of thing he's done throughout. He has continued since his time, since he left the bench a couple of years ago, to stay active in reform efforts in Texas. Maybe that's part of what he'll talk about today. And then finally, I'll just mention that if you are in San Antonio, if you wish, you can visit the Wallace Jefferson Middle School, if you'd like. And I just have to say, one of the things I want to learn is, as the father of someone who's about to enter middle school, I want to know if that's a good thing. So anyways, please join me in welcoming Wallace Jefferson.
Thank you very much. Oh, please, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. What a wonderful welcome from each and every one of you. I'm so happy to be here. The day that middle school opened, it was one of the proudest days in my life, not because of the honor of the recognition, but because my mother and father were there welcoming students as they came in and saying, you know, he's my son. It was a wonderful, wonderful day. I'm here to talk about things that you've been talking about for several hours now, and it'll continue on tomorrow. I thought I would give you my experience. Having run campaigns in the great state of Texas, there are about close to 27 million people in Texas. It's got some of the biggest media markets in the country, a lot of complicated politics. If you've been following at all what's happening with our Senator Ted Cruz and other Texans like Rand Paul and Jeb Bush, who spent a lot of time in Texas. Very, very complicated place. And I came on the court in 2001. Directly, as you heard, from private practice. I had my own small appellate firm. I got a call from the governor's office one day, and the question was, would you come up to Austin, Texas, and interview with Governor Rick Perry, who had just become governor because Bush went to D.C. after Bush versus Gore. Will you come up and interview with Governor Perry for a seat on the Supreme Court of Texas? There was a vacancy on the Supreme Court because Al Gonzalez had been on the Supreme Court and left to be White House counsel. And so in Texas, if there's a vacancy, the governor can make an appointment, and the appointee has to run in the very next election. And I'm thinking, I was 37 years old. I'm thinking, there's no way that I'll ever be appointed, but it sure is an honor, to come, and I'll let my clients know that the governor wanted to talk to me about this position. I thought it'd be good marketing tools. And so I drove up to Austin and met him for the first time. I didn't know the governor, and I didn't know his staff. The whole political infrastructure in Texas, at least the senior people like Karl Rove and others, went to D.C., so it was a whole new day. So I walk in and start talking to the governor. And lo and behold, it looks like, well, he's really serious about maybe putting me on the Supreme Court of Texas. And this was interesting to me because there had been all these people who were high in appellate circles, high in political circles, who'd been mentioned for the Supreme Court of Texas. And there are articles in the paper about here's the short list, and I was on the list but not at the top, and so I didn't think I really had a chance. But the governor said, well, maybe you should be on the court. And he said, but if you're on the court, you're going to have to run for office, and you've never run a campaign before. And he wanted to know what would they have against me if I were running a campaign. What would the criticism be? And since there had been coverage about the short list, I said, Governor, I've already heard. There are three things that they will say. That I'm too young at 37, that I've never been a judge before, and that I wasn't even born in Texas, and we need good Texans on the Supreme Court. I mean, and these were all serious, the most serious of the criticism. So I said, Governor, okay, young, but it's okay. I mean, you can feel at ease. Here's my background and experience in Supreme Court arguments and appellate expertise. We have board certification and appeals in Texas, and so Tom Phillips, my predecessor, was very young when he became Chief Justice. Al Gonzalez was young. You know him very well. Greg Abbott, who became Attorney General, now is Governor of Texas, was in his 30s when he came on the court. So don't let that concern you. I haven't been a judge, but I can translate to this court what these opinions really mean in private practice. What will the practical effect be on practitioners, on litigants, on in trial courts and local jurisdictions. So this is all a good thing. But the third thing was, well, not born in Texas. Now here's the first lesson in politics. If you have to run, you have to come up and think about your audience and think about a story. And this audience was, the governor, who was an Air Force pilot, so I said, Governor, I wasn't born in Texas because my father was an Air Force career officer. And so we traveled all over the country. There were 6 kids. My oldest sister was born in Nebraska, brother in Massachusetts, other brother in California. I was born in Washington State along with my sister. My younger sister born in Guam. I said, but Governor, we got here as quick as we could. I was 4 years old when I had my father assigned to Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio, so I grew up in Texas. But I said, Governor, more than that, my grandmother was born in Palestine. It's spelled the same as Palestine, but it's Palestine, Texas, in East Texas. And she was born in 1902, and her uncle was a lawyer in Palestine, licensed in 1906. Which is pretty remarkable when you think it wasn't that long after the end of slavery in Texas, in East Texas, where slavery was really very strong. I said, Governor, her grandfather was from Waco, Texas, and just north of Austin. And I said, Governor, Shedrick Willis, her great-grandfather, was a slave, and his owner was a state court judge. And now you're looking at the great-great-great-grandson and thinking about putting him on the highest court in the state of Texas. I mean, that's some progress that we've made. And you can see there's one staff person, taking down notes, and the governor, and he wants to engage and talk about this. And you can almost see the political wheels turning. This would be a Republican appointee in the state of Texas, the first African American, and look how far we've come, in the advancement of our society and the, spreading the opportunity among people of all, colors and races. And anyway, so that's what he was thinking. I said, Governor, not only that, yes, he was a slave and the owner was a judge, but right after the Civil War, this person who was denied all these rights became a city councilman. So he went from being, a private property to being a public servant, all in a very short span of time. And I can't imagine what that was like for him, to be, private property, but then a public servant who was advancing the laws for all of society, even among former slave owners, including his own. And I said the reason he became a city councilman was he had the support, the endorsement of his owner, Nicholas Battle, who had fought in the Civil War but came back and was a proponent of civil rights for the newly freed slaves. Well, you know, that I think sold him, and he asked me to serve. And he said, here's the deal, you know, as I said, you're going to have to run a campaign, and I'm going to help you as much as I can. So here's the first part of the campaign, and I don't know how much people really think about this. If you're coming from private life to becoming a candidate in a state as big as Texas, one of the first things you do is try to pick people who can help you. You have to put a campaign together. It's a real campaign. It's like you're running for governor or attorney general. You need a campaign consultant, somebody that can help you figure out the minefields. You need a campaign manager. You need people who can help you raise money. And you know, this isn't Florida, where there are restrictions on direct solicitation. We could do it in Texas, and you've got to have people who can help you do that. And it's overwhelming what you have to do. And so he put together, or his people did, a room full of consultants that would help me figure this out. And he said, it was like an interview. You know, there are 10 people around the room, and they're all telling me about their business and which, you know, is a good fit for you that can help you throughout the campaign. They're all excellent people, but you need someone that you'll be comfortable with. And so that was, you know, kind of what you do at first. You try to pick out the campaign people. And then you find somebody who can help you raise money. These are, you know, professional fundraisers. And they, for the most part, are paid based on how much they raise, a percentage of what they raise. And I want to talk more about that later. So once you get that and you hire a campaign manager who can get you around the state, then what happens? They give you a list. It's a long list of names. And they say you need to call these people. And we'd like you to come, you know, to the campaign office and make these calls. Every chance you get, make these calls. And what are you doing? You're asking for money. It's cold calls. They ask you to, you know, call your friends and family and anyone you know that would contribute, but also the heads of law firms. They have lists of people who have contributed, you know, in the last several elections and contributed to the Republican Party or Republican judicial candidates. And so you are, hi, I'm Mr. Smith. This is Wallace Jefferson. I'm newly on the Supreme Court. I certainly could use your help in a campaign to retain my seat on the Supreme Court of Texas. Mr. Smith, Ms. Jones, this is Wallace Jefferson, you know, and you're calling all over the place. Direct solicitations asking for money from people, many of whom appear before the Supreme Court of Texas. And the public doesn't understand that, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Okay, and then you begin your trek across the state. And who are you going to? Well, there are a lot of law firms that you go to, law firm tours. There's somebody designated at that firm to take you around and introduce you to lawyers. And that's very uncomfortable because you're walking around, your chaperone is knocking on doors and you're interrupting telephone calls and real work and saying, I'm Wallace Jefferson, I'm on the Supreme Court, sure could use your help, and here's a campaign literature and that sort of thing. If I was lucky, I would get the firm to put me in a conference room and have a big talk like this to, not just lawyers, but everybody in the firm, because everyone who votes, can have an impact on the election. And tell them who I am and why I'm running, and will they give me their support. You go to editorial boards who are very curious about, anyone new on the Supreme Court. There are 9 members of the Supreme Court of Texas. We have only civil jurisdiction. There's another high court that hears criminal cases. And in Texas, the wars, the real battle is, they were tort wars. They were between the business community and the trial lawyers. And everyone wants to know exactly where do you fit, in that scheme. And then you go to civic organizations, Rotary clubs and the Republican Party executive committees. And you go to big corporations if they'll have you. And you try to get your name out. And let them know, something about your background and your experience. And then you have to hire somebody the accountant, to help you with all the money that comes in. If it's a lot, that's a good problem to have, but you have to give finance reports. And you have to expose your world. Here's my personal finances, in categories for the world to see, and it's online. And then you travel all over the state. You go to Houston and Austin and San Antonio and Dallas. Those are the big spots, but you wouldn't get away with it if you didn't go to Palestine, in East Texas, and El Paso, even though they're smaller markets, and Midland and Brownsville, traveling. This is your life, and you commit to this. So what happens out on the campaign trail? And I think what a lot of the public thinks is you get cornered, and somebody wants to know how you're going to vote on a certain case. But I thought I was thinking about this and wrote down some of the questions that I would typically get out on the road. And I think this is interesting. A lot of people ask you, well, will you come and speak to my group, whatever it is? And a candidate gets in trouble because a candidate says, sure, I'd love to, and talk to my campaign manager, and then the next day there are all these invitations to come and speak when you need to be focused on campaigning. They ask about jury duty. I was on jury duty. It was inconvenient. They don't know what they're doing. Is there anything you can do about that? Okay, we'll see what I can do. The lawyers, why are we paper filing? Why can't we have electronic filing like the federal courts do, the PACER system? It'd be a great improvement if we got there. Lawyers would say discovery is too expensive. It is crippling the profession. Our clients can't afford to go through that. Or someone from the public at a Rotary Club. I had a dispute with my neighbor. I called a lawyer. They said it would be $10,000 just to talk to them. I can't afford a lawyer. Who can afford a lawyer these days? And what are you going to do about that? They would say, they would criticize some judicial decisions. They would talk about judicial elections. They'd say they ought to be nonpartisan. I had a parent come up to me once and said, my son in school got a ticket for yelling at the teacher, a Class C misdemeanor ticket. And you have to go to municipal court and fight that. You don't get a lawyer for this. What do I do? Does this make sense to you, Mr. Jefferson? Others say, in Texas, there are so many people who were convicted of a crime who were later exonerated because they were innocent. DNA proved them innocent. Is this the right way to run a justice system? A lawyer would say, your court took 3 years to decide my case. That's crazy. It's got to be more efficient. Adoption takes too long. These are the sorts of questions that I got. And the reason I wanted to share those with you is because I know that I'm addressing people who are advocates for changing the way we select judges and to get away from electing judges in partisan races. But a campaign can, ironically, teach a judge how to better serve the rule of law. And so things like e-filing, I could say years later, I heard you, and we have adopted a statewide e-filing program in Texas. You can't afford a lawyer? I heard you. We have new court-approved forms to aid the unrepresented and have other policies in place. Ticketing kids, in my State of the Judiciary address, I said we need to get rid of Class C misdemeanors. We're the only state or one of the only ones that does this. Let's get rid of it. It's gone. And so, whereas hundreds of thousands of kids, mostly African American and minorities before, were having to go and get fined, or go to court, and their parents go to court, not happening anymore. You can actually change lives that way. Court funding problems. Here's one thing about electing. You go out there and you're talking to the heads of corporations, the heads of law firms, the opinion leaders throughout the state. Then when you go to the legislature, you can say, I've got support because these people said that they would help me get done what needs to be done, which will improve all of our lives. So the point here is I'm a fierce advocate for change, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But it is not completely horrible that judges are out there in the communities listening to the problems and concerns of society and then coming back and trying to do something to change it. What are the fundamental problems? You know this better than most people in our country. One of the big ones to me is that voters know next to nothing about the candidates for judicial office. Many of the people I talked to in the Rotary clubs, they were not even aware that Texas elects judges, had no idea, even though they've been voting for 25, 30 years. And why is that? Because Texas has straight ticket voting. You can vote, in 2008 was my last election. People are voting for McCain and everyone else who's a Republican all the way down the line. Or you vote for Obama and everyone else, and they have no idea who you're voting for. We are lucky if we have good judges as a result of this process, because often entire slates of judges are swept in or swept out depending on what's going on politically at the top of the ticket, in a governor's race or in a presidential race or in a local county. And people say, well, you can educate the public about who's on the ballot. Well, not really, or at least not in Texas, or at least not in the big counties or statewide. If you go to Houston, it's Harris County, you walk in the ballot booth, you're voting for 70 judges or something like that, from the top Supreme Court all the way down. I mean, it just makes no sense. And and it's not the case that Republicans are better than Democrats or vice versa. You've got to find the person who is committed to doing the best job. And there's no way you can really get that information for that many people or on a statewide ballot. So I don't think that works. In 2008, my election, I had a Democratic opponent, a very good judge from Dallas. He was on the trial bench. And so it's a Republican versus Democrat in the general election. And I was scared, because Barack Obama's on the ticket. And he is exciting, all of these new voters, and especially in the urban areas, they're coming out and they're registering and they're excited. There was a rally that Obama had right near the courthouse on the Capitol grounds. I could hardly get to work. And I'm thinking, am I going to lose? I better try to do what I can to appeal to African-American voters especially. So on the evening that he gave his closing argument, do you remember that, his campaign closing argument? I bought television advertisements, and primarily in Houston, in Harris County. And my ad said, Wallace Jefferson, the descendant of a slave who was owned by a Texas judge. Today, he's Chief Justice of Texas, only in America. That was the pitch. To let the African-American voters know that here's somebody they may not have known who was on the ticket. Now, that being said, and I did well, I won that year, but what are the three most important qualifications to win election in Texas? It's party affiliation is number one. It's the sound of your name, I would say, number two. Wallace Jefferson, thanks, Mom. That's a good, it's a good name for a ballot. And number three, it's how much money you can raise. And what is so disheartening in that is it has nothing to do with qualifications or merit. And so that TV advertisement of mine was good marketing, I think, and I think it worked pretty well, but it said nothing about how hard I worked or experience or background. And that's the problem. That's one fundamental problem with electing judges. Another very fundamental problem is that the fundraising, the public doesn't believe in it. The public thinks if you're accepting money from a litigant or a lawyer, then you are going to back that litigant or lawyer in your judicial rulings. And so the confidence in a fair and impartial system of justice goes away just by the very practice, this very practice that you have in Texas and in many other states, even increasingly in states where judges are elected in retention elections. I need to stop very soon so I can have a question and answer period. But let me give you just one nightmare scenario. that happened to me, and it'll give you a flavor of what it's like to run in a state like Texas. Shortly after I was appointed by the governor and started my campaign, I got a call from this gentleman who said, Mr. Jefferson, or Justice Jefferson, can I take you for coffee and talk about your campaign? I said, sure. And so we met. He flew in from Houston, and we met and had coffee in Austin. And he said, what an inspired choice the governor made. I'm a publisher, and it's rare that we've seen somebody with your qualifications and experience and talent being appointed by the governor, and congratulations. And let me know what I can do to help. And I said, well, thank you very much. And that was about the end of it, and I left. Then a couple days later, he calls me up and says, we just met, and one thing I didn't mention to you is that as a publisher, I've got this publication that goes out to hundreds of thousands in Harris County of conservative voters, the very kind that will come out and vote in a Republican primary and in a general election. And they can be very helpful to you because they take the endorsements from this paper into the ballot booth with them, and they follow. We've done studies to show that who we endorse, they vote for. And we sure would like to have you in that paper. I said, well, thank you. And he said, a half-page ad costs $25,000. A full-page ad, like $100,000. Would you be willing to do that? And I said, well, thanks. My advisors are telling me I need to save my money for a TV campaign mostly. I'm not going to do much print, but I really appreciate that. And he said, well, if you're not going to do it, we're going to have to offer it to your opponent in the primary. And I said, do what you need to do. And so when the publication comes out, there are all these full-page, half-page ads of all these politicians from governor on down. I wasn't in there because I didn't do that. Everyone who had an ad endorsed in my election, no endorsement, which is a signal. I mean, this is what happens in politics in Texas, and people don't understand it. And I'm going to finish with this. Why can't we change it? Why is it so hard? Remember I told you about these fundraisers that they collect a percentage of what they raise? The campaign consultants, they get very wealthy, not just in the fees for campaign consultancy, but in the mail-outs that they do. They get a percentage or some kind of money, and I don't know exactly how it works, for mailing out all this literature. Well, these are the same consultants and fundraisers that work for the governor, that work for lieutenant governor and the speaker and every House rep and every state senator. And there are over 3,000 judges in Texas, and they work for the judges. And they have the ear of all of these opinion leaders and public officials in the state. I think that's one very severe barrier to change, at least in the state of Texas. So that's campaigning. You're campaigning not really on merit so much, although you can use it as a way to inform the citizens of, what the third branch does, but you have to conform your campaign to what's happening politically, either with Obama. Today, it would be with the Tea Party in the Republican primary. You've got to figure out a way to make sure they don't run somebody against you, or you can appeal to them without sacrificing your independence as a judge, and the public doesn't understand. And so I left the bench in 2013. The thing I missed most about it, about the court, is the ability to influence change, really. The thing I miss least about it, maybe you can guess. Thank you.